Travis Youssef, and welcome to GovTalk. Today we'll be sitting with Senator Jack Martins of the 7th District. He has spent years serving our community, from his time as mayor of Mineola to his time in the state Senate, focusing on issues that matter most to Long Island families, including affordability, education, public safety, and protecting our local environment. Senator, thank you so much for being here today.
Great to be back. Thank you, Travis.
You're welcome. Yeah, welcome back. Yeah, it's been a while.
It has been. It has been, absolutely. But I always look forward to these chats, and hopefully looking forward to a few more as we go forward.
Yeah, wonderful, Senator. So now you grew up here right on Long Island and have served this region in many capacities, from mayor of Mineola to state senator. How has your upbringing here shaped your approach to public service?
Well, you know what? I was taught early that if you're going to get angry or upset about something, you should be ready to do something about it. Try to make things better, interactive with the community. It's always been, I think, an important part of who I am, and it has a lot to do with how I was brought up. So when you see things may not necessarily be going in a direction that you feel they should, and that goes back to my time in Mineola, and the reason I got involved running for local elections was precisely that. You know, if you're going to complain about something, you better be prepared to step up and do something about it, and hopefully do so in a positive way.
For sure. Yeah. No, absolutely. Was there a specific moment or issue that made you say, I want to do this?
Well, you know, I ran for office in Mineola because, you know, having grown up in Mineola, my parents moved to Mineola when I was 4. You know, so you know, having grown up there, I saw where the community was heading. There were some concerns. Certainly, after getting married, starting my own family, my wife and I living in the village, I wanted to take a more active part in it, and that's why we did it. You know, it really was. These efforts are not as much individual efforts as they are, you know, the group that we grew up with, people we socialized with, people we lived with, our neighbors, and you know, it turned out that it was, you know, it was my role to take that step forward. Certainly, there was a lot of help I had from people in the community. For us in Mineola, it was, you know, looking at the village and deciding, you know, what do we want this village that, you know, had been around for 100 years, had gone through rapid expansion post-World War II, had dealt with, you know, a lot of the different things that you'd expect from sometimes a small city, you know, having its own water department, its own Department of Public Works, its own sewer. It really had elements that of a large village, and yet we wanted to make sure that it had that small village feel to it. So we decided that we would focus on that, the quality of life issues, reinvesting in parks, but also looked at the downtown, and, you know, understood that we had to do something to, I think, add a different element to the downtown. When we were elected, there were no houses, no apartments, nobody living in that downtown, which you know, was a problem. You need to have feet on the ground. You need to have a presence down there. We needed to have housing for that next generation.
And that accessibility too, as well, for
because
people.
we had the benefit of, you know, one of the great train stations on Long Island and access to New York City.
Yep, absolutely.
So all of those things came together, and we were able to, I think, do some really special things in Mineola. And you see it now. I mean, that downtown is vibrant.
For sure.
There are great opportunities down there, and that's a testament to the government they have now. Mayor Pereira, before him, Mayor Strauss. You know, really great things, but a wonderful community.
No, definitely. You did wonderful things, Senator. Well, as mayor, you did wonderful things. So I think that's really fantastic, Senator. You talked a little bit about your family. How do their perspectives influence your views on key issues, like, for example, education or maybe even community safety?
Well, my parents immigrated from Portugal in the early 1960s. So looking, as is the typical immigrant story, looking for opportunity, looking for a better life, sacrificing for future generations for our children, which is, I think the prototypical immigrant story, and frankly, it's the American story. So when they came in, high priority on education. I do believe strongly that education is the gateway to that next step.
Knowledge is power.
It really is, and I think we grew up, my brothers and sisters and I, with a deep sense of sacrifice that our parents had made, and also a sense of our responsibilities to not, really not to squander their sacrifice. And so focus on education, focus on working hard, which, I mean, their example each and every day. My parents were those people who got up early, went to work, came back, never complained, and somehow always managed to make things work. Yeah. So I'm very, very privileged.
And parents will do that. I myself, being a son of an immigrant, I really think that, just instilling those family values, those, really just good morals, so that you have kind of that ripple effect, throughout your community and through the people that you meet every day, which I think is really so important.
No, so critically. We also grew up with a sense of the importance of this country, and from a civic standpoint, the opportunities that the country provided the family. And so, my parents, although not born here, always wore their citizenship proudly. And
for sure.
I think, again, that's another typical immigrant experience, which is, they came here for a reason. I remember someone telling me once, we don't travel and cross oceans and cross rivers to come to the United States for a handout. We come here looking for opportunities and for work. And that's the immigrant story, and that's what we have to get back to. Realizing and frankly respecting those opportunities, frankly, and policies as we go forward.
No, definitely, Senator. And I think that it's so important too, to understand that that's why, someone does come here, that land of opportunity. What do you enjoy most about representing the community?
I happen to represent the, and I've said it often, the best district in the entire state.
The 7th, right? The
7th, absolutely. It runs from the Queens line to the Suffolk line along the North Shore of Nassau County. I often say it's Floral Park on the lower west corner, the Plainview in the lower right corner, and then Great Neck and Laurel Hollow as the bookmarks on the northwest and northeast corners. It's a wonderful community. We have 43 villages. Each one has its own personality. I love diving in and getting to know the people, the history. There are differences and nuances in these different communities. And frankly, everyone has different needs, but when you boil it all down, it really comes down to let's figure out how to keep things affordable. Let's figure out how to make sure our kids have opportunities and that their schools are properly funded. Let's make sure that we have invested in our parks and environmentally in our shorelines. Just making sure that we're protecting for that next generation.
Absolutely.
I believe in the proverb, which is, we don't inherit the land from our parents, we borrow it from our children. And so if you think about it that way, we really have a trust and an obligation to make sure that our children get it at least in as good a shape as we got it.
Yeah, and if not better.
If not better, at least in as good a shape.
Now, what would you say some of your biggest legislative accomplishments have you been most proud of so far?
Well, I am very proud of the work we did with regard to water here on Long Island. Understanding that we get all of our water from a sole source aquifer that has been frankly, under a lot of pressure, some would say under attack, since World War II. A lot of things were done here on the island. Stuff was put in the ground, impacting our aquifers. Perhaps we didn't locate our drinking wells, in the right spot, sometimes putting them too close to the shoreline and intruding and allowing for salt water to intrude into our aquifers. And so working with, at the time, my great friend, Michelle Schimmel, when she was in the Assembly and I was still working in the Senate, we did, I think we did some really important work when it comes to protecting the environment, but most particularly our sole source aquifer.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fantastic, Senator. And in regards to environmental issues, especially like groundwater protection, being really critical here, what steps are you really advocating, for protecting Long Island's water and those resources? Well,
we have to be careful. One, where those wells are being placed. Two, where there are plumes, and we hear about them all the time. We have a responsibility to make sure that we tend to those plumes, remove those contaminants, and do so in a way that understands the responsibility we have to make sure that that aquifer is there. Most importantly, we need to, I think, double down on the fact that we do have great water. Yeah. We do have, remarkably, with all of the things that have happened over time, that water you're getting from that faucet is actually cleaner and healthier than perhaps what you're getting in that bottle that you've decided to buy and drink from, with the plastics and all of the microplastics that are in those bottles that go through heat and freezing cycles, and you don't know where that water came from. You don't know what the impact of that plastic is. You don't know, but I can tell you that each and every water district on Long Island and in New York State is held to a certain standard.
For sure.
There are all kinds of testing, and so that water, trust it, because it is not only safe, it's safer than than the stuff that you think is a good alternative.
No, for sure. And I think that's why, our pizza and our bagels taste so wonderful, right?
Absolutely. They cannot make bagels anywhere else in the world like they can here.
No,
you're absolutely right.
This is a fact, And Senator, with those investments in the infrastructure, how do you think that's improving everyday quality of life?
Well, I think it does just that. We have a responsibility to the environment. So whether it's taking active steps to make sure that we are not impacting our water, but that also means we need to build sewers. We need to actually prevent nitrates from going down into the water. The impacts of nitrates on our our coastal wetlands, on our fish and our fish population. It tends to promote the growth of algae and which deoxygenates different our coastal waterlands, and frankly it is I'm happy to say something that I think we've turned the corner on. There used to be what they call these dead spots out in Long Island Sound, and as per a recent study that I read recently, and we continue to monitor, those dead spots have only gotten smaller and continue to get smaller, and so that only bodes well for, as we said, the next generation and our responsibilities to that next generation. We now have dolphins spotted in Long Island Sound, something that I can say when I was growing up probably wouldn't have happened, but through efforts on this side of the Sound and on the other side in Connecticut, I think a great deal has been done to protect the environment for that next generation.
And I think that's really crucial. Again, that working together of making it better for others, for everybody, really. What should residents know about the long-term environmental planning process and all that?
Well, they should know, one, there is a role for government in that, but there's also a personal responsibility that we all have to understand. Whether it is rolling down the window and throwing out a plastic wrapper because what's the big deal? Well, it is a big deal. It is. We need to be sensitive to how we address things we put in the ground.
Correct.
And how we dispose of garbage. And frankly, I am really pleased to see a renewed effort by our county governments in providing sewers, especially out in Suffolk County, where they don't have the network that we have here in Nassau County. Yep. The responsibility, because that aquifer we spoke about, it doesn't know, county lines.
Yep.
So, we have to protect it in Suffolk as well as Nassau. And then remember, we all think about Long Island being Nassau and Suffolk County, Brooklyn and Queens as well. And so
without a doubt,
we have to make sure that all of it is being protected on all fronts. And I think there is a renewed interest in making sure that we coordinate. And there are some great groups out there that are doing just that. Working with local governments, these non-governmental agencies or advocate groups that make sure that it stays top of mind.
For sure, because we have to understand that there are consequences to our actions.
Sure.
No matter how big or small. Especially we have the power ourselves to go out and do the right thing by not littering, by not, by thinking kind of, maybe second guessing yourself and taking a step back and being like, what, maybe I should be thinking more about others and more about the environment and that,
We're going through a phase, let's say, in government right now. We have made tremendous investments in renewable energy, for example. So whether it's solar, whether it's offshore wind, there are, and it's kind of been somewhat controversial of late, and there have been some discussions about whether or not those projects should go forward and what they mean long-term for the region. But I do think, we should have an all of the above, which also means, this move away from natural gas as an alternative is something that is a concern for me.
Yeah.
So many of our homes are heated using natural gas. There is a great push out of the government in Albany, and then certainly certain groups that would have us electrify everything. As they say, get rid of our gas stoves. But it's more than the gas stove. It's, we live on an island, and as we see right now with the cold temperatures that we've had these past few weeks, the grid doesn't have the capacity to provide electricity to heat our homes.
Correct.
So we're in a rush to transition to electric only when we know that the grid doesn't have the ability. And if we have a storm, if there's a hurricane or a nor'easter that comes in and knocks down power lines and people lose power, if you don't have an alternate way to heat your home, you're going to be in trouble.
Correct.
If you go back and look at post-Sandy, so many of our communities and so many of our homes and our families were able to get through those sometimes 2 weeks of not having electricity and keep their homes warm. Neighbors, accommodating neighbors, inviting them into their homes, helping them get through that period. We need an all of the above approach.
Correct. Yeah, and right now I know we're seeing a big issue of that down south, with the freezing, the electrical lines, and people. I think things have gotten a lot better now, but over the last week and a half or so, things were pretty dire down there. And I think that is so important, of looking at kind of both sides of the coin and being a little bit of devil's advocate and saying, well, look, yes, we understand why, but here's the reasons why maybe you shouldn't, or maybe why you should rethink.
Or not be in such a rush to get there. We'll get there eventually. I think everyone agrees that's where we want to be. We want to be in a place where we're relying on renewable energies as long as they are efficient and as long as they're able to address our needs, and we're able to do so safely.
Yep, in the right way.
New York State, if it were its own country, would be the 13th or 14th largest economy in the world. So, a very strong economy by itself, yet it makes up 0.4% of the world's carbon footprint. So we have done remarkable things over the last 30 years to reduce our carbon footprint, our impact on the environment, and I think now that we are in that last 0.4%, sure, we can improve, but we shouldn't be doing it at the expense of our residents and our community safety.
Correct. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Senator. talking a little bit more about the communities and everything, you know, Long Island communities care deeply about public safety, local infrastructure. What do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities right now, especially given the current environment?
Well, we have to keep focusing on training and resources for law enforcement. We have to make sure that they have the resources they need, and frankly, the training they need to be able to continue to protect our communities. You know, a lot of what we see around the world, and certainly around the country, when it comes to lapses, when it comes to law enforcement, usually has to deal with training.
Correct. It starts at the top.
And so let's refocus on that. We happen to have, frankly, you know, the safest county in the country.
Yeah.
We have a remarkable police department that works so well with our local communities, and we're very fortunate to have that.
I agree.
On the other hand, or equally as important, you know, we have this great volunteer fire service we have out here on the island, often goes just overlooked.
Yep.
And think about how remarkable that is. We have, between Nassau and Suffolk County, we have 3 million people who are living on an island, and by and large, our emergency services are provided by community members, and so we have a responsibility, who are volunteers, we have a responsibility to make sure as well that they are properly trained, well-funded, and that we make sure that they have every resource available to them. Because if you're going to volunteer to keep your community and your neighbors safe, then our first responsibility as, you know, your community and your neighbors and your government is to make sure that you have every resource so that you get home safe as well.
Correct. Yeah, you really want to give them the tools so that they feel comfortable and confident, you know, in doing their job.
Yeah, and frankly, you know, there is it isn't a dollars and cents issue, because if you think about it, you know, the network that grew up organically with these departments being created is something we couldn't replicate if we wanted to, or should we try?
Yeah.
So let's do what we can to make sure they have their resources.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And just talking in, you know, with local voices, how do you make sure that local voices are heard at the state level, especially coming from, you know, being mayor of Mineola, and now you're at that state level over the last, I believe that you're going into your 15th year, I believe? Well,
I'm going into my 5th term. I took a couple of years off between my first stint and now my second stint, but I think it comes down to having a real sense of what's important.
Sure.
You know, we have a large state, 19 million people, and Erie County and Buffalo is different than Nassau County and Mineola.
Definitely.
Let alone New York City. And you know, the state is so diverse that, you know, we understand each community or each area or each region may have its own needs, but by and large, you know, my responsibility when in Albany is to explain the needs of our communities here on Long Island. You know, make sure that our values are heard when it comes to policy decisions. You know, by and large, you know, our communities here on Long Island, they need help when it comes to the large issues, which should be state issues, where they should come in with resources. But otherwise, leave us alone. You know, I think there are other parts of the state that rely more heavily on government, and that's their choice. But at the end of the day, if we're talking about affordability and accountability, we have never been able, and I've never seen a path to affordability that leads through bigger government, a path to affordability that leads through greater spending by government. The only way to grow and to provide opportunities and to create wealth is to support the private sector and allow them to do it. So whether it's on the housing front, whether it is with respect to the cost of goods, the one thing we can do and should do in New York State is get government out of the way. And, you know, whether that means a tax cut, you know, which they never talk about, do they, Travis?
No.
But the reality is, you know, the state spending has gone up over $80 billion in just the last 8 years.
Wow.
So if you go back to 2018, forward to 2026, state spending went from about $190 billion to about $260 billion was what the governor proposed just last week. Wow. $260 billion in and an $80 billion increase in 8 years. How about a tax cut?
Yeah.
How about cutting back and giving, taxpayers across the state a real cut, which we can do by just getting government out of certain things that they shouldn't be involved in.
Sure, and that would definitely help now, especially with everything over these last couple of years with inflation going up, kind of like living this post-pandemic era of just trying to navigate the world, and everything's up, from...
I couldn't agree more. Everything is up. We have a responsibility from a policy standpoint to stop, to reevaluate and to understand every dollar. So those $260 billion, every dollar the government has comes out of someone's pocket. And so if we look at it that way and we understand, there's a role for government, but that role needs to take a back seat and not be an impediment to growth, I think we'd be better off. One of the challenges in Albany, and certainly whether it's Albany or whether it's Washington, or sometimes here locally, is finding the middle. The world and the communities here on Long Island, for the most part, we're in the middle. We don't tend to go too far to the right or too far to the left, and I think that's a wonderful part of who we are. There are other parts of the state that may be more inflexible one way or the other, but we tend to be a lot more, as they say, purple, and I think that's great.
I think it's really a melting pot. I mean, honestly, of just people's values, and again, I think we're more alike than we are different.
Right.
And especially like when it comes to being heard and understanding each other, we just listen. One person doesn't have to be louder on the other side than the other, but it's just a matter of having that back and forth and understanding your fellow, neighbor, community.
It's so true. I remember when I was elected to the Senate back in 2010, and having come off a few years in Mineola, I said, if I go up to Albany and if people just listen to me, we'll be able to figure things out. And then you get up there and you realize that those things that we prioritize here aren't necessarily the same things they prioritize in the North Country, or as I said, in Rochester or in the southern tier around Binghamton, and that each community in each area of the state has some real needs. And then you begin to listen and you begin to have those conversations about, why do we need to reprioritize where we're spending things?
Correct.
Certainly, we're always going to advocate for resources to come home, but we also understand that in doing that, we also have to understand and respect the fact that there are needs everywhere else.
Correct.
And be able to reach some accommodation. Such an important yet oftentimes lost art, listening.
Yes, actively listening.
Actively listening.
Not listening just to answer, but to listen to understand. Right?
And incredibly important.
Yeah, for sure, Senator.
So, priorities going forward, parks, our natural resources, trying to address issues of, and actively addressing issues of affordability, whether it's the cost of electricity, and utilities, whether it's taxes, and figuring out ways to actually reduce government spending so as to pass on those savings to people. God forbid, the policy in New York State is to provide people with opportunities to hold on to their own money. And I understand politically there are different philosophies out there.
Sure.
But the reality is we should all want the same thing.
Correct.
And I think our constituents should expect that from us.
Yeah, it's just to live our best life.
That's right.
And to be able to do better for the others, the next ones that come along.
And provide for our children.
For sure. Yeah, Senator. So as the last question here, Senator, what message would you like to leave with the community watching tonight?
Well, stay active. if your eyes are telling you something, and your news outlets are telling you something different, trust your eyes. All too often, what we hear, whether it's through the news or through different reporting, not a knock on journalism, but the reality is we live in an extraordinarily important part of the world. Our communities here on Long Island are amongst really the best when it comes to everything from our quality of life, our education, our ability to provide education for our children. We have incredible parks and shorelines and resources. We have a lot to be grateful for.
Yeah.
What we now need to do is focus not only on maintaining and preserving it, but making sure that we have a state and a community and a region that people want to live in and can afford to live in.
For sure.
Too many people we know are moving out of state, leaving, and in many respects voting with their feet. And so we got to figure out, by actively listening, why. And I think it comes down to just not being able to afford to be here anymore. Sure. That's the challenge as we go forward, and that's what we're committed to do.
No, it's wonderful, Senator. Well, I know that you'll get there.
Thank you.
And we'll only get there together, because who do we have but each other?
I agree with you. And whether you happen to play for the red team or the blue team, put it aside and let's figure out how we work for Long Island.
For sure. No, absolutely. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator, for being here. And thank you for watching GovTalk. I've been Travis Youssef, and we'll see you next time.